Hello and welcome back to the channel. So it's been a minute since I uploaded, and we're gonna come back with something that I thought would be fun. Well, for me personally, we are going to make a tier list of Godot nodes. Obviously, it's not going to be objective. It's not going to be comprehensive at all. These are literally just the nodes that I use. As you can see, there's no 3D nodes. This is just Godot 2D mainly, and there's not a lot of UI nodes either. But anyways, let's kick this off. I think this could be useful for some people who are less experienced than me. I could share the way that I use these nodes, the ones that I find specifically useful. The ones that I use a lot are going to be higher up, the ones that I use less are going to be lower, and the ones that are hard to use, I guess, are going to be lower as well. And like I said, people who are less experienced than me, I think, could maybe see some nodes that they've never used before, and I could explain why they're good or why they're bad. And if people who are more experienced than me see stuff that I should be using maybe, or stuff that is really useful and it's not here. Again, for Godot 2D specifically, they could share it in the comments. Maybe I could learn a thing. Anyways, we'll kick it off with Node2D, the granddaddy of most of these nodes. Here, it's going straight into S tier, not because it's a great node by itself, but just because it's the top level node of all of my games, and gotta pay the respects. Same thing goes for these. This one specifically goes into S tier. This is just a node. Node2D inherits from node directly, and there are a lot of things in the documentation for node that I think people who haven't looked at it should look at it specifically if they're learning Godot, because Godot is very object-oriented, node-oriented, I guess. Inheritance is a big thing in Godot, and there are a lot of functions in node specifically. Although everything inherits from object, so it goes object is the granddaddy, node is the parent, and Node2D is the child. But I think this one is the most useful one, where you just want to figure out what's going on in Godot, figure out what you can use, how you can use the functions in it specifically for pretty much anything over here. Anything over here inherits from this. So yeah, same thing goes for this. You could look at it. I didn't find anything particularly useful in here, but it's still good to know, right? Anyways, we'll go into actual game development now, and we'll start off with the bodies. The Area2D, I guess area is not a body technically, but it's still used for the same things that these are all used for. So Area2D, very surprising. I thought when I was learning Godot, Area2D, whatever, I'll just learn it to make easy games, something that's simple, something that just lets you keep track of collisions, stuff like that. And then I still use this almost as much as kinematic body or anything else, really. Because it's, first of all, simple, and it kind of has a lot more uses than these three. Like, Area2D can let you keep track of things entering an area, but you can also use it as an object in the game world. Like, pair it with a sprite, pair it with a... I keep doing... Why is it doing that? Anyways. Pair it with a sprite, pair it with a collision shape, and you've got yourself a player, an enemy, whatever you want. I still use it very extensively. like oftentimes when I don't need physics, it's just all areas. It's like none of these. Anyways, kinematic body. I want to put it here. Maybe. But I mean, yeah, it does what it's supposed to. It's very easy to use, easy to learn. This is your basic character with collisions. You give it a collision shape, you move it, and it collides with other characters. This is your player. This is maybe your enemies if you want collisions for them. This is like if it's a side scroller game, all of your moving entities are this basically, maybe except platforms, which could be static bodies. But anyways, yeah, very very solid node, very easy to use and learn. And anyways, rigid body. I don't like rigid bodies. They're like most of my problems with rigid bodies like just stem from the fact that I tried using them as this, and you can't really use rigid bodies as just a player character this easily. Like, I mean, you could technically develop a game where the player is a rigid body, where the enemies are rigid bodies, and etc., and you could have better physics in your game because of it. But it's a very unintuitive compared to kinematic body to use. It's I mean, if you just want some physics objects in your game that player can kick around while moving around, like, I don't know, Valve's Half-Life, like all of those rigid bodies in there. The player is obviously not a rigid body, but the player can carry around rigid bodies, and there you go. Hard to use if you're trying to make player behavior happen. With this, very easy to use if you just plop it down and it collides with kinematic bodies and goes flying. Super easy to use then. If you're trying to implement movement for rigid bodies, it's a whole different experience, and it's a pain. Static bodies. Here, just because I don't use them that much. Static bodies are supposed to be, so for me personally, everything that doesn't move is just in a tile map, and I make it from tiles, and everything that moves and has a specific sprite dedicated to it is a kinematic body, or an Area2D specifically. And I mean, yeah, static body is great and all, but this has way more functionality than this. Kinematic body is just like better. I guess you could use it for organizational purposes, like, I mean, so you know what's not supposed to move, but other than that, like, static body, okay, it's there. Sprite, it's pretty good. B tier, but you know what's even better? It's animated sprite. There we go. I mean, it's very easy to just plop down an animated sprite and put in one frame into it, and you have a sprite. And then once you actually add animations to your character, you don't have to change your nodes. So I never use a sprite unless I know for sure that I will not be adding animations to the thing. So which ends up just being like maybe a bullet. That's a sprite for me. Or anyways. And now this one was very surprising to me. This is a tween node. If you don't know what a tween node is, it allows you to change different values in an object through time with different interpolations. I know it's a mouthful if you've never seen a tween node in action. If you don't know what a tween node is, I highly suggest you learn it, because it's really useful. Like, for example, if you need to move a character from point A to point B, you interpolate between the position A and position B, and you can change how fast the character accelerates between those positions. The alternative to do that in code would be just too painful. You can do so much with tween nodes. Oftentimes, I use tween nodes like just as a placeholder for movement. Even really convenient to use once you figure out how to do it, and it's just surprising like how many occasions you can find to use it. Now, AnimationPlayer, it's like a tween node on steroids. But so a tween node allows you to interpolate one value at a time, and AnimationPlayer allows you to interpolate a lot of values at the same time. You can create animations. The player can have like an attack animation where he goes from point A to point B, he accelerates faster, and once he gets there he slows down and like gets there slower, and then he changes his color from normal to red tinted, and you can have everything like that and everything in between for AnimationPlayer. And it's not S tier. It's not S tier like tween node, because tween node is very simple, very useful, very easy to use, and it does what you expect it to do at all times. I love the tween node. This is very useful. This is very useful as well. I've made movement animations with it. I've made attack animations with it. I've made a lot of things with it. But the problem with it is that it's sometimes very buggy. I've had an animation that all of the characters in the game shared, and everything inherits from a character, and the character has all of the animations. It was kind of an inheritance situation, so I didn't have to create animations for every single character in the game. They just used the same animations, and their movement was just standardized, right? But at some point, the animations in one of the characters decided to break after I added an extra animation for a character, and I mean, everything broke. I had to redo all of the animations. I had to just recreate the entire thing, and it was just a pain. Like, I still don't know why it broke. It was probably something on my part. I probably did something wrong. I'm not gonna argue with that, but it's just hard to use at times, and it's just like all of your animations that you spend hours working on are just vulnerable. So if you're gonna use it, it's very useful. If you're gonna use it, I suggest you have backups of your animations, and you don't mess with those backups, because if you break it, it's a pain. It's a pain to recreate. Now, audio stream player. This is the simple audio stream player. Does what it's supposed to do. I mean, how else are you gonna have sound? But for some games, this is higher. Like, I mean, there's so much I'm actually gonna put this here for like a specific type of game. If you're making like an atmospheric game, I've made a horror game, 2D top-down horror game, and it's like, this just allows you to have directional sound. So this is audio stream player 2D, and it allows you to have directional sound. So you have a listener, you have sounds coming from different directions. And when you have a horror game and you just hear like a zombie or like a monster shriek or something, and you're like, okay, all right, alrighty, with like with no directional sound, you're like, okay, there's a monster somewhere. But with this, you can kind of tell where the monster is, how far they are, and especially if you can't see them, but you can hear them, it just kind of like adds a whole new layer of atmosphere. It's super cool. I mean, a lot of games can't really, a lot of 2D games can't really make use of it, but it was so cool for a horror game I made when I switched from using this to using this. It was a whole different experience. Now this, I'm gonna put this here just because like there's too Man, I love Godot, and there's a lot of cool stuff in Godot. So a lot of this stuff is just gonna go straight to S tier. This probably shouldn't be an S tier. I'm not gonna put this as an S tier anymore. It's cool. It's cool to see what you inherit, but like object realistically doesn't have that much you need to know. This one is important. Object. Label. I don't use a lot of UI elements, but label goes straight over here. You need to show the score, you put a label. You need to tell the player something, you put a label. You want to do anything to communicate with the player, you put a label as you're done. All right, I'm a terrible game developer, I know, but labels are great. Button, it's okay. It does what it's supposed to do. For like, I mean, if you're making a pixel art game, button goes straight over here. And texture button, which allows you to use pictures. I mean sprites. I mean textures. Sorry, textures. It's literally in the name. Texture button. If you're making a pixel art game, just make a simple picture of a button, like animations for it. It's very fast. There's no reason to use this unless you're making like a stylized game. You can obviously do more with like stylized buttons, but texture buttons are way easier to use, and they're easier to make look good, because this is very hard to it's very hard to make normal buttons look good. Timers, you can use timers for everything. Timers go straight to S tier. I mean, does it really need an explanation? Camera, I mean, it does what it's supposed to. Camera 2D. I wish, you know what I wish? That Godot would have like camera flare stuff, like just by default, like camera shake, and more camera functions. Like you can easily implement all of those on your custom camera node. It's not hard to do. But I mean, sometimes you just like, I mean, if someone gets into Godot and I want to make something cool, it's harder to do because you don't have like widely used camera functions like screen shake. Anyways, all right, canvas modulate. Also pretty useful if you're making a game with like darkness and light, and that's you know what I realize? There is no light node. Like if we're gonna have a canvas modulate and talk about how you can use canvas modulate to set the entire screen to be black and then use a white to, anyways, we need a white node over here, and I'll be right back. All right, we're back with a white node. So back to canvas modulate. There's with canvas modulate, you can basically change the color of a sprite or a node. Well, not of a sprite or a node, but of a canvas of this thing. And a node basically has a canvas by default, and whatever is drawn on the canvas, all of its children. So if you have like a game node at top and you put a canvas modulate as its child, and you want to change the color of everything inside this node, you just change a value on this, and it will automatically change the color on everything. And it's really cool. You can make the entire screen dark, and if you have like a white 2D, you put a white 2D in, and you revert the canvas modulate with an opposite color, and a part of your screen will be normal. And this is what white does. The canvas modulate changes the entire screen, and then a white changes part of a screen depending on like distance or a texture that you set it to. You can have like a white texture, so you can have like a pixel art lights. If you want to make like a horror game or an atmospheric game, you could look into this. It's really cool, and it's pretty easy to do too. Like a lot of things in Godot are surprisingly easy, and that's why I mean I love this engine. Yeah. So once you change the color of the entire screen and you have a light and everything, you realize that you want to have a UI still, and that's why you need a separate canvas. You put a canvas modulate on a game node, and it changes everything, and your UI is now dark. But if you put a canvas node as a child of your game node, and you put your UI inside of it, this canvas modulate that's inside of the game node will not affect a different canvas, right? And that's that. This is particles, CPU particles. I use CPU particles. They are, I mean, Godot has good particles, no complaints. Maybe it's not as good as Unity, but CPU particles, the only reason you would use them is if you don't have access to GPU particles, because GPU particles, GPUs are way better at drawing particles, at processing particles, and this is GPU particles, or like normal particles it's called, and this is CPU particles. You want to use GPU particles if you're using GLES3, which you use by default, which puts this like this, because CPU particles are bad and they are slower than GPU particles. But I don't have access to GPU particles because I use GLES2 because my browser games run better on it. And sometimes if I use GLES3, which is the renderer, I probably should have started with that. GLES2 and 3 are renderers, and they are OpenGL 1 and 2, WebGL, sorry, not OpenGL, WebGL 1 and 2 respectively. And well, WebGL 1 runs better for me, but it cannot use GPU particles. But if you're making a desktop game, or you're doing something else with Godot other than browser games, you want to use GPU particles. Simple as that. Navigation. Navigation 2D. Super cool node. Allows you to do pathing. Actually, it's definitely not A tier. It's B tier in Godot. Because it's super useful if you have enemies that you want to go towards the player and navigate around walls. So if you have, it's a little complicated to figure out at first, but once you get the hang of it, it's useful in a limited way. That's why this is B tier so far, because if you give it 2 points to navigation 2D, if you give 2 points to navigation 2D, it will return you a path, this thing, path 2D, between point A and point B, taking into consideration like the static bodies and the tile maps inside of the level. So it will avoid colliding with objects that are baked into the navigation mesh. And the reason why this is here is because when you're using navigation 2D, you have to pre-bake navigation meshes. Now, if you don't know what that means, it essentially means that whatever you start with is your navigation mesh for the entire game. If your level changes somehow, your nav mesh doesn't change. If you like move, it actually can't track collisions with these, so it can't avoid other playable characters, other characters in the game. It can only avoid like static bodies so far. But once Godot allows you to bake nav meshes in real time, this is obviously going to go way up. This is going to be way better, and this is path follow 2D. So you use navigation 2D to ask for a path between point position. There you go, point A and B, and it will return you a path, and then you use path follow 2D to go along that path if you want, but you can also do that manually. And path follow 2D, honestly, these two are useful. Path follow 2D, I mean, it's okay. It's not great. It's okay. Parallax background. It's pretty cool for side scrollers. Allows you to have like a background that moves slower than the foreground. So you have characters in the foreground, you have like obstacles and stuff. But in the background, you have like mountains that are moving like slower because they're in the background. So it gives like an impression of like three-dimensionality. The reason why it's not higher is because, I mean, it's if you have multiple parallax backgrounds, if you want to have like multiple backgrounds, the values of like scroll speed and stuff like that, it's a little unintuitive, I would say. It's just a little hard to figure out, like from just looking at the value of how fast the background is scrolling, what it will look like in game. So you need to, if you want to have two parallax backgrounds or one parallax background, you actually need to play the game to see how fast it's moving. You can't really like set it to a value and then know what to expect instantly unless you use them way too much. I don't know. That's that. Parallax background, position 2D, straight into D tier. Position 2D, I mean, it's could be useful. Never used it. Maybe you want to make a spawn point. Maybe you want to do something else, but why don't you just use a node 2D? Looks prettier. It's a circle. What is this? Okay, I'm just a terrible developer. There's obviously reasons to use positions 2D. I guess it's just a position as opposed to a node with everything that goes into it. I don't know. Never use positions. Raycast. If it's disabled by default, it goes straight into S tier. If it's enabled by default, it goes into D tier. I'm sorry, but if I don't have to, I'm just joking. Raycasts are useful. It's A tier. If you're making a platformer, you can use raycasts to check if a character is on the floor. If you're not using the is on floor function, that this is there by default. You can check if the path that the character is moving in is colliding with something. You can do a lot of things with raycasts. I mean, it has its uses. It does it well. The fact that it wasn't enabled by default for a while there, it was kind of funny. There was so many times that games would just be broken just because raycasts were not enabled by default. Anyways, tile maps, super useful. Tile maps are great. It is not higher. I mean, it does what it's supposed to. It's not higher because auto tiles are hard to create and use, and it's kind of hard to figure out how to use auto tiles. And I really think Godot should make it more intuitive to use auto tiles, should have more resources explaining how to use tile maps properly, because it's very hard to learn them. They're extremely useful. Like compared to rigid bodies, it's probably harder to learn how to use tile maps. Way harder to, like, rigid bodies. I hate rigid bodies. They're hard to use, but they're like way less useful than tile maps. And that's why they're lower, even though they're easier to learn than tile maps, because auto tiles are great. They're amazing. They save you so much time, but it's so hard to set up a good auto tile. It's hard to figure out. It's just like a pain, but you need to learn to do it if you want to make 2D games, I guess. YSort. Actually S tier easily. So what YSort does is you put children into it, and it will sort their rendering priority by their Y position, and it will automatically draw things that are supposed to be in front. You don't have to do anything. Literally S tier, because this is the easiest thing to use. You want your tree that is supposed to be in front of the camera, drawn in front of the camera in a 2D game. You got it. You put this node, and you put a tree in this and a character in this. The character runs behind the tree, and bam, it's drawn behind the tree. Character runs in front of the tree, and bam, it's drawn in front of the tree. Simple to use, very useful. Anyways, that's that. That is all of the nodes I use. Actually, that's a lie. I don't use this at all. We used this once, and then I was like, why am I using this? It's just like... Anyways, thank you for watching. I hope I wasn't rambling too much, and I'll see you next time.